Bernie Sanders just had a kickoff rally in New York, in Chicago.
I was there.
Okay, in New York you were there?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see you. He was raking.
I went in the general crowd. I don't mingle with the media. I go with the normal people.
Okay. You don't like the fake news. No. So
you are fake news.
So I mean, bottom line, by the numbers, let's keep it real. If Joe Biden raised $10 million in a week, if Joe Biden had 1 million volunteers, all of these outlets would be calling the election. They would say, skip the Democratic primary, we need to put Joe Biden up against Bernie. But we're hearing a lot of the criticisms against Bernie. I think Jennifer Rubin wrote 2 hit pieces on him in one day.
Who cares what Jennifer Rubin thinks? Sorry to interject, but just as a side note, Jennifer Rubin in 2012 was one of the lead media propagandists for Mitt Romney. So she hates Trump now, but in 2012, if you follow this coverage closely, she was the biggest booster of Mitt Romney. It turned out that after the election, she admitted that she was lying on Mitt Romney's behalf at the Washington Post. And she was never penalized for it. Actually, she's been rewarded for it because she became one of the top, anti-Trump conservatives.
Yeah. And now progressive Chris Hayes has her on twice a week.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. So I want to ask you, because I read one of your pieces real quick, and I think you have legitimate concerns over some of the things Bernie's done so far. If you want to elaborate.
Okay, so I wrote a piece for Spiked.
And by the way, full disclosure, he is a Bernie bro. No, I'm kidding.
That's right. I voted for Bernie in 2016. I've always been public about that. It doesn't mean
even though in 2014 you did a tweet saying he had no
I
chance.
did one tweet saying I didn't think he had much of a chance in mid 2014, and people keep bringing it up. Yeah. Okay, I repudiate and disavow that tweet. All right, but I voted for Bernie in 2016 because I'm a registered Democrat. I want to vote in Democratic primaries. It doesn't mean it's central to my identity, or I can't criticize Bernie, or I'm not striving to be objective in how I analyze how the campaign plays out, right? So since he announced the campaign last month, in the week subsequent, there were, I think, a couple of red flags that are going to be potential liabilities for him going forward. One is that he sent out this missive to his surrogates, basically giving credence to the whole Bernie bro notion that was concocted by his arch enemies in 2016. He was saying, don't harass anybody, don't abuse anybody. Basically accepting the logic that he could be in any way responsible for how his supporters engage online. Mm-hmm. Really? The whole basis for the Bernie bro narrative in 2016 was journalists who disliked Bernie scouring Twitter and Reddit and saying, oh my God, this guy is abusing me and he hates women and won't Bernie disavow. No, that's insane.
Well, it was more insidious than that. It actually was hatched out of Hillary's campaign. If you read WikiLeaks, Hillary's campaign was planting this with the media, and the journalists picked it up.
And Olivia Nucci, remember this? She revealed that somebody pitched her a Bernie bro story, so whatever. But the point is that the basic logic of the whole Bernie bro storyline was a myth and a joke from the outset. So for him now to partially validate it, I think it's just going to boomerang on him, because at a certain point, we all know, the media, I think, is going to recognize sooner rather than later that he's the front runner. Mm. Biden might be polling a little bit ahead of him in national polls, but it doesn't matter all that much. Bernie's got the most robust national organization. He almost won the Iowa caucus last time. Remember, he lost to Hillary in Iowa by, I think, was it at 1 point?
When you say almost lost, I mean, they
almost won.
Right, but they called the election when he was down 1/10 of a point. So
right. So I'm saying he came close to actually beating Hillary in Iowa in 2016.
I'm pointing out, I think it's, if looked into further, he might have won. But anyway,
I doubt it. But in any event, he then won New Hampshire by a huge margin. Yep. Those are the first 2 states. Yep. So he has a good chance to win the first 2 states, which in most circumstances would result in the media crowning you the presumptive nominee, right, or at least very close to being the presumptive nominee. So at a certain point, the media is going to recognize that he's a front runner. I wrote an article for The Spectator, which is a British magazine, in November of last year, it was basically saying, why isn't anybody calling Bernie the front runner? And I laid out all these reasons for why he's the clear front runner. So I think eventually the media is going to come around to that. They're going to melt down for the most part. They're going to, all the Hillary retreads are going to launch into overdrive, smearing him and trying to undermine him. I don't think it's going to particularly work. Could be wrong. You never know what could happen. You could, something crazy could come up. But one of the tactics they're going to use against him is to say, look at this anonymous troll behaving badly online who claims he's a Bernie supporter. a lot of the trolls that they accused of being Bernie bros ended up being like actual trolls, meaning they were not Bernie supporters, but they were posing as such to make Bernie look bad. But they're going to take the validation of the logic that he gave in this letter and use it against him. Mm-hmm. And my only point is, don't give any quarter to your most despicable opponents.
Right.
It's just going to give them more grounds to attack you.
Well, I also think there's a fallacy to it because I think where he has been weak, and I've said this in 2016, you know, when you're sending out an email, you know, let's be kind and just be on policy and this and that, you're also putting aside the fact that, I mean, Hillary Clinton literally had a super PAC that was built on paid trolls on the internet doing exactly what they're claiming Bernie Sanders supporters are doing. And also, I mean, listen, I like Bernie, I don't hide it, but when I look online, I see the majority of people that are Bernie Sanders supporters criticizing Beto O'Rourke or Kamala Harris based on their policies. Yeah. But I think that it's been concocted and there's been this misdirection. Hillary Clinton was very masterful at this in 2016. When you questioned her on her Wall Street record or private speeches, that was a personal attack.
Right. And Bernie actually withheld a lot of the most potent attacks that he could have used in 2016 against Hillary until it was too late. Yeah. Remember, he famously said the emails were no big deal. I don't care about your damn emails. Mm-hmm. The emails ended up costing Hillary the election, according to her own supporters. The email investigation resulted in the Comey letter just prior to November. Mm-hmm. I was on Democracy Now! In May of 2016 saying, look, I know Bernie came out and said, don't worry about her damn emails, but her damn emails are the subject of an FBI investigation that's hugely publicized. We don't know how this is going to end. And sure enough, it came back to bite her, and now they say cost her the election. Right. So if Bernie was doing a proper job vetting Hillary, what he should have done is actually saying, you know what, maybe this is being overhyped, but at the same time, you're subject to an FBI investigation. So really from a standpoint of electoral liabilities, that's something we need to think about as Democrats if we want the Democrat to win. Right. But he wouldn't go there, and what happened? Even though he withheld those criticisms, now the Hillary people all say he was too mean to her and he didn't do enough to help her, he didn't unite the party, blah, blah, blah. So his withholding those criticisms didn't accomplish anything. Mm-hmm. Because the people who hate him are going to continue hating him regardless.
Do you think, I mean, obviously you can't get in his head, but do you think he's trying to, in some way, play ball with the Democratic Party establishment?
You don't have to get into his mind to know that he's doing that. He co-authored an op-ed in the New York Times with Chuck Schumer. Yeah. He appeared at events, you know, basically endorsing Andrew Cuomo. He is very cordial with all of his colleagues in the Senate. So, remember, he did that Unity tour with Tom Perez in 2017. I don't know if I think you might have covered that.
Not on the road, but I understand. Okay. Which was frankly embarrassing for Tom Perez.
Oh.
Bernie went out like crazy cheers, and Tom Perez goes out, and, you know, his mother.
It was awkward for everybody, frankly. Yeah. So, of course, he's playing ball. And, you know, on one level, it makes sense because you got to unite the party coalition to some extent if you want to win the Democratic nomination.
Well, I think he might be also positing that, hey, I got to get at least 10% of Hillary Clinton voters to come over to me if I'm going to have any chance.
Yeah, but I think he doesn't. I don't want to get into the mode where I'm like giving campaign advice to him because I don't feel that's like my proper role. But if I were giving him advice, what I would say is,
well, I mean, you're dressed pretty well.
I know. I look 364 days out of the year. I don't look this good. Yeah. So you're.
Well, I didn't say you look good. But
well, you're. Yeah. Either way, you should be very honored that you're viewing me in this entire. Well, thank you. But if he, what I would say to him is, yo, Bernie, do what you've always done, because that garnered you a huge base of support. Maybe make some tactical adjustments along the way. But don't feel like you have to make special appeals to these people who hate you. Mm-hmm. They're going to use the pressure that Hillary used against your supporters last time, saying, oh, isn't Donald Trump so horrible, you got to unite around the nominee. That same pressure is going to be there if you win the nomination, if you come close to winning the nomination this time. So you don't have to get out of your comfort zone and make like awkward appeals to all these Hillary people, because they're not going to tolerate voting for Trump. I mean, as much as they don't like you, they don't like Trump even more. So don't worry about making these kind of awkward, you know, again, entreaties to these people. And then another thing I mentioned in that piece, which I think is also worth noting, is Venezuela. Actually, before I get to that, let me mention the racial stuff. And I want to talk about this carefully because I know how inflammatory it can be.
Be careful.
I'm going to try to be very careful. Well, so In his first round of interviews after the announcement, he said, I agree. He said something to the effect of, I agree that the 2016 campaign was too male and too white. Now, from a tactical standpoint, it makes perfect sense to want to make more inroads with racial minority demographics to win the Democratic primary. To win the Democratic primary, you have to have a multiracial coalition. There's no bones about it. So he's been going to South Carolina. He's meeting with the Black Democratic Caucus there. He was on the Breakfast Club this morning, which I saw some of, which was funny. He's doing some legitimate things to try to expand his repeal among different demographics that weren't as strong for him in 16. Fine. But you don't have to couple that with this kind of bad faith admission that your previous campaign was too male and too white, which is what, again, all his arch enemies were saying in 2016. So you're giving them ammunition to just use the same talking points against you again.
Well, I also think, I agree with you in some part, but I also think it's kind of been overstated that he had a problem with African-American voters. Because if you just look at it, I mean, he was up against the Clinton machine that already had a firm, essentially, stranglehold is the wrong word, a strong, commitment and support from the black community nationwide. I mean, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton were going down to churches for 20 years. I saw it on the campaign trail. Right or wrong, I think wrong, because frankly, Bill Clinton and with Hillary Clinton's support did a lot of things that were not advantageous to the African-American community. But people in Mississippi, in Georgia, in Arkansas, a lot of them didn't even know who Bernie Sanders was, talking specifically about African Americans. So I think the primary schedule was front-loaded to favor those states, and he wasn't a known quantity. So yes, he did get his clock cleaned in a lot of these states, but I don't think it was necessarily that it was they hated Bernie as much as they, especially the biggest voting demographic in the Democratic Party is actually African American women. Older African-American women in particular. So I think it was overstated. And secondly, to your point, I do think he had a bit of too many old white guys running his campaign. But where I disagree with kind of the messaging that's gone out is he had a problem. Because if you look, I mean, Nina Turner was a major surrogate for him. Cornel West, Danny Glover, and he has policies. I think Bernie, where he has had an issue, and I was talking to Ty about this, he hasn't connected how his policies would, for example, break up the big banks. Well, the 2008 global financial crash, disproportionately, foreclosures happen more on African Americans than white people. So I think he needs to make those connections to his policies with the black community.
I just think he could take reasonable steps to diversify his campaign staff, which is good, without then conceding that the previous campaign was too white and too male, because that feeds into the bro narrative.
Right.
And I don't think the bro narrative had any basis at all. So you're giving the people who would wield the bro narrative as a cudgel against him additional ammunition. And that's what he should be.
You're making me dizzy with these words. Cudgel, propagate, confabulate. I can't handle it. I want to move on. So,
and the Venezuela thing really quickly, because that was also mentioned in the article. So Bernie has been, there was a Saturday a couple weeks ago when Trump, Bolton, Abrams, and the whole crowd trying to engineer regime change in Venezuela did this phony aid delivery effort where they amassed aid convoys on a bridge in the Colombia-Venezuela border. And of course, that was just a pretext to engineer the overthrow of the government. Nobody thinks that Trump is sincerely committed to providing humanitarian aid to struggling Venezuelans. But on that same day, Bernie put out this statement, through a couple of tweets saying Maduro must let in all aid. Mm-hmm. So he's basically giving cover to this Trump regime change scheme. And it doesn't make sense for Bernie because his biggest electoral asset, I think, or one of them anyway, is the fact that he's been so consistent for so long. Mm-hmm. He's been saying the same damn thing, almost to the point of being tedious, for decades. This is a guy who held events with Noam Chomsky in Burlington, Vermont in the 80s on the harms of U.S. foreign policy in Latin America. You're going to tell me that anybody should seriously believe that he's now on board with a Trump regime change initiative? Elliot Abrams, really? Elliot Abrams actually orchestrated some of the very foreign policy initiatives that Bernie inveighed against with Chomsky in the 80s. So it doesn't make sense because it's not consistent with who he has always seemed to be. And I don't know. Maybe maybe he has evolved somewhat. It's become more establishmentarian on foreign policy. It's true that he supported Iraq sanctions in the '90s. He supported the bombing of Kosovo in the '90s. He's kind of a little bit of a normie on foreign policy. Tulsi's a lot more adroit than him in that area. But it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and you're kind of giving away your most precious asset. I feel he could have easily just not say anything.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.